The chandelier looked like frozen rain over a city made of mirrors. 200 guests held their breath as the woman in white, the face on every brochure, crumpled against the podium. Her hand lifted toward the service door, toward a black janitor half hidden behind a ficus, sleeves rolled over weathered forearms. "Elijah, please," she rasped, each syllable scraping past panic. "Make it fast." For a heartbeat, the room forgot how to speak. Security hesitated. Phones rose, and the man with the mop bucket moved, calm, deliberate, like a tide returning to shore, and the noise turned to a hush you could hear. 9 hours earlier, the lobby at Essenza Biotech smelled like disinfectant and ambition. Marble gleamed. A brass plaque promised healing at scale. Elijah Cole rolled his cart past a security desk that never looked up. When the elevator doors opened, a man in a cobalt suit took one glance at the cleaning supplies and stepped back out. "I'll catch the next one." Alone in the lift, Elijah studied his reflection in steel, salt and pepper hair, the kind softness that once steadied terrified families, hands that remembered the choreography of miracles. He touched a velvet pouch in his pocket. Habit, not magic, and let the doors open on the 44th floor. Event staff swarmed the ballroom. Screens, florals, glassware like ice. He mopped like he always did, invisible and essential. A woman in red heels scattered coffee across his newly dried path without looking down. Near the restrooms, 2 junior bankers performed certainty for each other. "Stone's going to mention that fraud again," one said. "The surgeon who took bribes. She saved the company." The other laughed. "Some people think letters after their name are a free pass." Elijah wrung the mop as if squeezing out a thought. He had learned the weight of silent truth. At 2, the floor manager flicked his wrist. "Billionaire's night. Keep the shine up, keep out of sight. No distractions." He gave Elijah the quick, measuring glance that files a person under background. By 5, the skyline turned gold and the guests arrived in armor. Charcoal wool, hard silk, diamonds catching the chandelier's ring. Elijah slid to the corner by the service door, his preferred perch, and watched Genevieve Stone enter her orbit. Winter white suit. Smile you could hang a campaign on. The crowd parted for her like doors. He'd once been the person crowds parted for, but that belonged to another life. The one a rumor turned into a headline, and a headline into a verdict. A license gone. A hospital lost. A son's calls turning to silence. Now he traded pride for stability and learned every name that keeps a life standing. Night shift nurse, cafeteria cashier, the security kid who held an elevator with his foot. Essenza paid on time. Floors always need shining. When the lights dimmed, Genevieve sold a future. Essenza's miracle compound, projections like rockets, integrity as brand. She spoke about cutting out rot, about exposing those who put profit over patience. She didn't say his name from the old article. She didn't have to. From 30 feet away, Elijah saw what the room could not. Breath a shade too shallow, fingers hovering near her collarbone, a jugular line that pulsed wrong beneath expensive makeup. He read the slide's flashing mechanisms and market share and saw, buried inside, a contraindication that should never meet a heart like hers. Pride can be pathologic too. Intermission scattered the crowd. A young reporter in sneakers bumped his cart and startled. "I'm so sorry." Sincerity, a rare bird up here. "It's all right," Elijah said, catching a listing champagne flute with reflexes that made the reporter stare. "You've done that before," she murmured. "A few times," he said, and the moment moved on. When the finale began, the chandelier seemed brighter. Genevieve announced a number that made money hum. The room swelled. Elijah felt the countdown only he could hear. He checked his watch. He watched her hand. He wondered who he would choose to be if the moment came. It came in a blink. A white-haired donor sagged to a chair, gray and sweating. "A doctor," someone cried. A man in a silk tie lunged for a wrist he couldn't read. Elijah scanned skin, breathing, speech, tremor. "Not cardiac," he said, voice steady as a metronome. "He needs sugar, not CPR." A glucose meter appeared. A number blinked urgently low. Orange juice. Color returned like a tide. For the first time, cameras found the janitor. So did whispers. Across the room, Genevieve looked at him like she'd seen a ghost, then pressed a small white bottle from her purse to her mouth with the secrecy of power. He didn't need the label to know. The applause crested. The city glittered. and a ballroom that thought it already understood justice was about to learn humility the hard way. Because when the woman in white staggered and the mic fell and panic cracked the air, the only person who didn't panic was the one they'd trained themselves not to see. Their eyes met for the first time in 4 years. The color drained from her face. She knew exactly who he was. And for the first time that night, the Queen of Acinsa looked afraid. The ballroom smelled of champagne and expensive nerves. Behind the scenes, Elijah Cole mopped a spill outside the executive suite, his posture quiet, shoulders slightly bent like a man trained to disappear when power walks by. 2 men in suits rounded the corner, voices sharp with self-congratulation. "Tonight's going to be historic," one said. "Stone's announcing the deal of the decade. Remember the doctor she exposed? Fraud something." "Yeah," the other chuckled. He thought fancy degrees made him untouchable. She buried him. Serves him right. Elijah's hand paused on the mop handle. He didn't look up. The muscles in his jaw shifted, then stilled. When their laughter faded down the hall, he kept working, motion steady, eyes fixed on the floor. He had practiced this. How to hear your own ruin repeated like gossip and keep your breath even. For years had passed since the day his name was erased. One accusation, whispered at the right cocktail party, had spread like a stain. A fabricated trail of bribes and falsified data, evidence crafted by the very woman being toasted tonight, had destroyed everything. His hospital board revoked his license before the truth could blink. His colleagues stepped back, his reputation vanished, his own son stopped returning calls. Once, he'd been chief of cardiothoracic surgery at Mount Gregor Hospital, a pioneer, a mentor, a healer. Now, he scrubbed tiles for people who would never imagine he'd once held beating hearts in his hands. He'd learned humility the hard way. Pride had been burned out of him, leaving something quieter, stronger. That evening, Genevieve Stone's empire shimmered in full bloom. Guests floated in a sea of glass and gold. Every camera adored her. Every investor hung on her voice. Elijah stood in his corner by the service door, invisible to the celebration. When the presentation began, Genevieve spoke with the precision of a surgeon and the arrogance of a queen. "Integrity," she declared, "is what separates innovators from imposters. 4 years ago, I exposed a fraud who nearly destroyed this company." Applause thundered. Elijah didn't move. The words sliced him open, the lie rehearsed so long it had become truth to the world. Yet he felt only calm, because he could see something no one else could. Even from 30 feet away, he noticed the pallor beneath Genevieve's makeup, the subtle tremor in her hand as she gestured toward the giant screen. The jugular pulse too visible against her neck. He'd seen it before, in patients who ignored their own hearts. The drug she was praising tonight, the cardioxin compound that would bring billions, had a known contraindication, fatal for anyone with undiagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And Genevieve Stone, Elijah realized with cold certainty, had it. She was killing herself with her own miracle. He opened his mouth, then stopped. No one would listen to a janitor. Not here, not tonight. So he stayed silent, folding the truth inside himself like a secret file. During intermission, a young reporter drifted away from the crowd, eyes bright, heels clutched in one hand. She accidentally bumped his cart. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you." Her apology startled him. It had been years since anyone had spoken to him like that. "It's fine," he said. A passing waiter tripped, a glass falling in slow motion. Elijah caught it midair without spilling a drop. The reporter blinked. "You've done that before." He smiled faintly. "Old habits." Before she could ask, the lights dimmed again. The final act was beginning. Genevieve's speech climbed toward its peak. "Tonight, we stand on the edge of history," she said, voice trembling slightly now. "Because we dared to demand excellence." Her hand pressed briefly against her chest. The audience saw confidence. Elijah saw arrhythmia. By the time the applause ended, he knew she had minutes left before her body betrayed her completely. But he stayed where he was, the invisible man with the clearest sight in the room. Then, from the other side of the ballroom, a white-haired investor collapsed. Shouts erupted. "Someone get a doctor." A tall man in a tuxedo dropped to his knees beside the fallen guest, fumbling to start CPR. Elijah scanned the symptoms, gray but not cyanotic, pulse weak but steady. He stepped forward. "Stop," he said quietly. "He's not having a heart attack. His sugar's low." Heads turned. A woman gasped. The self-appointed doctor glared. Sir, step back. Elijah didn't move. If you start compressions, you'll break his ribs. He needs glucose. The crowd murmured. Someone handed over a blood sugar monitor. The reading blinked. 43. Murmurs turned to awe. Orange juice appeared. Within minutes, color returned to the investor's face. The tuxedoed man looked up, bewildered. How did you know? Elijah wiped his hands on a towel. Because I've seen it before. Across the room, Genevieve Stone watched him. The city blurred through the ambulance windows, streaks of blue and red reflecting off steel and glass. Inside, Genevieve Stone's breaths came shallow and uneven, her pulse flickering beneath paper-thin skin. Elijah Cole sat beside her, gloved hands hovering inches above her wrist, counting silently. The paramedic, a young man with alert eyes, looked up. Sir, are you family? Elijah shook his head. No, but I know what's happening to her. The medic hesitated, protocol wrestling with instinct. Then tell me. She's in acute heart failure, Elijah said evenly. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. She's been taking her own drug, cardioxin, contraindicated for her condition. The medic blinked. How do you? Elijah's tone didn't change. Because I designed the base compound she modified. Years ago, that silenced the siren inside the van, even as it screamed outside. Genevieve's eyes flickered open, unfocused. Elijah. Her voice was a rasp of disbelief. You don't talk, he said, steady but soft. Save your strength. Tears spilled down her temples. I didn't mean. He met her gaze. You did. But right now, I'm not your judge. I'm your doctor. When they arrived at Mount Gregor Hospital, the same place that had once erased his name from the marble plaque, Elijah followed the gurney through the sliding doors before security could stop him. A cardiologist in navy scrubs intercepted them, voice clipped. Who are you? Elijah Cole. I stabilized her in transit. You're not on staff, she said. Step back. He glanced toward the monitor strapped to Genevieve's chest. Her vitals were collapsing faster than their argument. If you intubate her now, you'll trigger cardiac arrest. She needs oxygen by mask, not pressure. The doctor hesitated just long enough for doubt to bloom. How do you know that? Because I've been here before, he said. The nurse beside her looked between them. Doctor, he's right. Her blood pressure's too low to tolerate intubation. The cardiologist bit her lip, then barked orders. O2 mask now. The team moved. Elijah exhaled, the faintest relief in his shoulders. Minutes later, alarms shrieked. The monitor flatlined. Code blue, someone yelled. The room snapped into choreography, compressions, paddles, panic. The lead doctor grabbed the defibrillator. Don't shock a flatline. Elijah shouted. His voice sliced through the chaos. It's not ventricular fibrillation, it's asystole. You'll fry her heart. The doctor froze mid-motion. Then what? Epinephrine, he said. 1 milligram for push. 2 minutes of compressions. For a long second, no one moved. Then the doctor nodded. Do it. The nurse slammed the syringe into the 4-line. The seconds crawled. 2 minutes later, the monitor beeped. One pulse, then another. The room exhaled as though it had been underwater. The cardiologist turned to Elijah, eyes wide. You just saved her life. He shook his head. No, you did. I just reminded you to listen. The relief in her face softened into curiosity. You said you're not on staff. Who are you? Elijah Cole, he said simply. Cardiothoracic surgery. Formerly. Recognition flickered. Cole, as in Dr. Cole? The one who was ruined, he finished. Yes. Before she could respond, Genevieve stirred weakly on the gurney, eyes fluttering open. Her voice was barely air. Let him stay. The doctor hesitated. He can't. I said, Genevieve gasped. Let him stay. Protocol shattered beneath the weight of authority. Elijah stayed. Through the glass of the ICU, he watched as machines replaced muscle, as her heart strained against itself. She'll need surgery, the cardiologist said grimly. Mitral valve repair, septal myectomy. Without it, she won't last 24 hours. Elijah nodded. Then you'll need someone who's done it before. Her eyes narrowed. How many times have you? 63. She stared at him. You can't operate. Your license? I can guide you, he said quietly. You'll have to be my hands. The door burst open. An administrator entered, face tight. This unlicensed man cannot be here. Before anyone could argue, the young paramedic who'd driven the ambulance stepped forward, phone in hand. Sir, That video from the event, him saving the CEO, it's everywhere. Millions of views. The administrator froze. What? People are calling him a hero, the medic said. If you throw him out, this hospital will look like a villain. The cardiologist turned to the administrator. He doesn't operate. He consults. That's legal enough. Silence. Then, fine, the administrator hissed. But if this goes wrong, it's on you. Elijah met her eyes. It won't. Minutes later, Genevieve was prepped for surgery. The cardiologist scrubbed in, trembling but resolute. Elijah stood behind the observation glass, headset on, voice feeding directly into her ear. Make your incision at the fourth intercostal space, he said. His voice was calm, measured, almost melodic. Steady. Don't rush. The septum will look like pride, too thick for its own good. Take only what's necessary. And as her scalpel touched flesh, the fallen doctor guided her every move. Not for revenge, not for recognition, but because his oath had never expired. The sun rose pale over Manhattan, its light spilling through the hospital's tall windows. Inside, the world felt quieter, sterile, suspended, waiting. Elijah Cole stood behind the observation glass of Operating Room 3, headset still clinging to his ears, his reflection framed against the glow of monitors. For 6 relentless hours, he had guided every incision, every stitch, every breath. Dr. Patel's hands had moved, but his voice had carried them. When it was done, when Genevieve Stone's heart began to beat steady and sure, relief rippled through the room like an exhale long denied. Nurses exchanged silent looks of wonder. Dr. Patel peeled off her gloves, eyes damp. You did it, she said through the glass. Elijah smiled faintly. No, he replied. We did. Outside, news had already begun to leak through the seams of the night. A video clip, grainy, unfiltered, raw, showed a janitor kneeling beside a collapsing CEO, hands moving with impossible precision. The caption read, "The man in blue who saved the queen of biotech." By morning, it had been shared 5 million times. At dawn, Genevieve stirred. She awoke to the steady beep of monitors and the soft ache of survival. Her vision cleared slowly until she saw him, sitting beside her bed, weary but upright, his eyes kind and unreadable. You're alive, he said softly. She nodded weakly. You stayed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Tears welled in her eyes. Why did you save me? Elijah's gaze held hers. Because that's what doctors do. She closed her eyes, pain and gratitude twisting together. I destroyed your life. He looked away. You destroyed my title, not my purpose. That same morning, Michelle Carter, the young reporter from the gala, uploaded her story to Bloomberg's site. The janitor who saved his enemy, the hidden life of Dr. Elijah Cole. It read like fire and grace, a man wrongfully accused, a life dismantled, a truth buried beneath corporate greed. Within hours, it was everywhere. Every news channel, every feed, every headline. By noon, #JusticeForCole was trending worldwide. The board of Asensa Biotech tried to contain the damage. Press releases, damage control, apologies that sounded rehearsed. But the internet has a way of cutting through polish. People didn't want statements. They wanted redemption. Genevieve watched it all from her hospital bed. For the first time in years, she didn't feel untouchable. She felt human. Every beep of the heart monitor was a reminder of the man she'd tried to erase. The man who had saved her 3 times. Once on the floor, once in the ambulance, and once in the operating room he wasn't allowed to enter. That night, she called for a camera crew. Her PR team tried to stop her, but she dismissed them with a trembling hand. The red light blinked on, and she began to speak, not as a CEO, but as a woman stripped bare. My name is Genevieve Stone, she said. 4 years ago, I made a choice that destroyed a good man. I forged evidence. I paid for false testimony. I ruined Dr. Elijah Cole because he refused to sign an unethical contract. Her voice broke, and she didn't hide it. He lost everything. His hospital, his family, his reputation, because of me. She paused, gathering the courage to keep going. Last week, I nearly died. And the man I tried to erase saved my life 3 times. He had every reason to let me go, but he didn't. Because integrity isn't a title. It's a truth you carry, even when no one sees it. When she finished, the internet went silent for 3 minutes, the rare kind of silence that precedes a storm. Then came the wave. Millions of shares, billions of views, headlines screaming confession and redemption in the same breath. Ascensi's stock plummeted 40% overnight. Investors resigned. The FDA opened an inquiry into cardioxin. But the public didn't care about the company. They cared about the man in the janitor's uniform who'd refused to give up his humanity. 3 days later, the New York State Medical Board announced an emergency review. New evidence suggests Dr. Elijah Cole's revocation was based on falsified testimony. The statement read, "Effective immediately, his license is under reinstatement review." When they handed him his reinstated credentials a week later, Elijah held the small laminated card like a relic of something he never thought he'd see again. The board chair, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, shook his hand. "We're sorry," she said. He nodded, humble but firm. "Just make sure it doesn't happen to the next person." Later, as he walked down the hospital hallway, his hallway now, staff members paused to greet him with cautious admiration. Some apologized. Some smiled with pride. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed of having once looked through him. Elijah didn't hold grudges. He didn't need to. The truth had done the work for him. That evening, he returned to the ICU where Genevieve rested. She looked up at him, frail but alert, her voice soft. "They offered you your old job back, didn't they?" He nodded. "And you said yes?" "I did." She swallowed hard. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make this right." He gave her the faintest smile. "Then start by helping others heal. That's how redemption begins." As he turned to leave, she whispered, "Thank you, Elijah." He paused at the door, his voice low but certain. "Don't thank me, Genevieve." Live like it meant something. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 small lights, each one a reflection of something enduring: respect, humility, and the unshakable truth that character, once buried, always finds a way back to the surface. Morning sunlight spilled over the skyline like gold dust, and Mount Gregor Hospital was already alive with the hum of life being fought for and saved. In Operating Room 5, the same one he'd been banished from years ago, Dr. Elijah Cole stood in scrubs again, his name stitched over his heart in white thread. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like coming home after a long war. The nurses moved quietly, respectful but wide-eyed. Everyone in the room knew who he was now. Not the janitor, not the disgraced surgeon, but the man who'd performed a miracle with nothing but his voice and his knowledge. Still, Elijah acted as though nothing extraordinary had happened. He tied his mask, checked the sterile tray, and said simply, "Let's get to work." His first patient back was not a billionaire or a headline. It was a retired bus driver named Harold Jameson, 63, with calloused hands and eyes that smiled even when his body betrayed him. "They said you're the best," Harold said from the gurney, his voice rough from fear. Elijah smiled beneath his mask. "No, Harold. I'm just someone who doesn't stop trying." The surgery began at dawn. Hours passed in a dance of discipline and grace, steel glinting under white light, the faint rhythmic beeping that marks the fragile border between life and loss. Elijah's hands moved with the same calm certainty that had once seemed impossible to recover. Every incision was memory, every stitch redemption. By the 8th hour, Harold's heart was strong again. The monitors steadied, the beeping even and sure. Elijah looked at the team. "Good job," he said, voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Let's close." When he walked into the waiting room later, Harold's wife stood clutching her purse like a shield. She froze when she saw him, searching his face. Elijah gave her the smallest nod. "He's stable." The surgery went perfectly. The purse fell to the floor as she burst into tears. "You saved him." He smiled softly. "That's what I do." Outside, the world was still obsessed with his story. News crews camped outside Mount Gregor's doors. Documentaries were pitched. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about the janitor who cleaned up the CEO. But Elijah ignored it all. Fame didn't interest him. Healing did. Meanwhile, across town, Genevieve Stone scrubbed her hands at a free clinic on the Lower East Side. The once untouchable CEO now wore a plain blue volunteer's smock, her manicured hands wrapped around clipboards and stethoscope cords. Her days were filled with patients who called her ma'am without knowing who she used to be. She learned to take blood pressure, clean wounds, restock supplies. She learned humility one patient at a time. One afternoon, she looked up and saw Elijah standing in the doorway. He was visiting the clinic to consult on a cardiac case. For a moment, the past hung between them. What she'd done, what he'd forgiven. "How's the patient?" he asked, nodding toward a young mother being treated inside. "Stable," she said quietly. "I'm learning." He smiled faintly. "Keep learning. It suits you." She hesitated. "Do you hate me, Elijah?" He met her eyes. "No. I let that go a long time ago. Hate doesn't heal anyone." Tears welled in her eyes. "You're a better person than I'll ever be." "Not better," he said. "Just lucky enough to know what matters." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he glanced around at the clinic's worn walls, the shelves stacked with donated medicine. "You're doing good work here." She nodded. "Trying to earn back what I cost others." "Then keep going," he said. "Redemption isn't a speech, it's consistency." When he left, the volunteers watched her wipe her eyes and return to work. No one knew her history, only her diligence. Maybe that was enough. Weeks later, Elijah sat in his office, watching rain trace the window pane. His son, Daniel, stood in the doorway, taller now, grown, nervous. They hadn't seen each other in years. "Dad," Daniel said quietly, "I saw everything. What you did that's everywhere. I'm sorry I didn't believe you." Elijah looked up, eyes soft. "You were just a kid. The world told you a story, and you believed it." "So did I." Daniel's voice cracked. "Can we start over?" Elijah stood and pulled him into a hug. "We already have." In the months that followed, Elijah's life returned not to what it was, but to what it should have always been. He trained young surgeons, reminding them that skill without empathy was just precision without purpose. He donated his settlement money to fund scholarships for medical students from underprivileged backgrounds. Genevieve continued at the clinic, serving quietly, faithfully. The media forgot her, but the people she helped didn't. Sometimes, Elijah would pass her in the hallway of a hospital or see her photo in a local newsletter, and he'd smile. He didn't need her apology anymore. The world had already delivered justice. Because real justice isn't a courtroom verdict or a trending hashtag. It's a janitor becoming a healer again. It's a woman learning that power means nothing without integrity. It's a man forgiving when the world expected vengeance. And most of all, it's remembering that miracles aren't made of lightning. They're made of work. The city was alive again. Horns, footsteps, chatter, a rhythm Elijah Cole had finally learned to walk in peace with. Months had passed since the night that changed everything. The world had moved on to new scandals, new heroes, new noise. But Elijah didn't need headlines anymore. He had traded the weight of injustice for the quiet joy of purpose. Most mornings, he arrived at Mount Gregor before sunrise. The halls were empty then, the air still soft with sleep. He'd pause outside the Your Wing, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and possibility. That smell had once haunted him, now it grounded him. He'd touch the badge clipped to his coat, Dr. Elijah Cole, cardiothoracic surgery. A small rectangle of laminated truth. Proof that some things, once stolen, can be reclaimed. His days were full. Surgeries, mentoring, coffee with interns who looked at him like legend. He told them, skill is important, but compassion is what steadies your hands. Some listened. Some wouldn't yet. That was all right. Time has a way of teaching the lessons ego refuses. Between cases, he'd sometimes visit the free clinic downtown. The waiting room smelled like humanity, baby formula, sanitizer, fatigue. And there, almost always, was Genevieve Stone. No Chanel suit. No headlines. Just scrubs and tired eyes and hands learning to heal instead of control. She was taking blood pressure when he entered one afternoon. A child giggled as she let the cuff hiss air from his tiny arm. When she noticed Elijah, she smiled. Not the rehearsed smile of her old life, but the fragile one of a woman grateful just to be seen as human again. "How's the clinic?" he asked. "Still standing," she said with a small laugh. "We treat people who can't afford the system I once profited from." He nodded. "You're turning harm into help. That's something." She wiped her hands on her apron. "It doesn't erase what I did." "No," Elijah said gently. "But every day you choose to do better, the past loses a little more power." She looked at him for a long moment. "I've been writing a fun proposal," she said. "For scholarships, students who want to be doctors but don't have the money. I thought maybe you'd read it." He smiled. "I'll do more than that. I'll match it." Her breath caught. "You'd do that after everything?" He shrugged. "Forgiveness is cheaper than hate, and it heals more people." When he turned to leave, she stopped him. Elijah, she said softly, you taught me that titles mean nothing. But dignity means everything. Thank you for giving mine back. He met her gaze. You gave it back yourself. Later that week, Elijah performed a delicate bypass on a young mother. As he worked, the hum of machines felt like music. Each heartbeat under his hands was a reminder of why he endured those 4 silent years. It wasn't about reputation, it was about responsibility. Saving lives had always been his truest language. After the surgery, he walked into the recovery ward to find Daniel, his son, waiting. You still working miracles, huh? Daniel teased. Elijah smiled. Miracles are just the parts of science people don't understand yet. Daniel chuckled. Mom would be proud. Elijah's gaze softened. So am I. They went for dinner after, the first father-son meal in years that didn't carry the ghost of resentment. They laughed easily, talked about music and baseball, not lawyers or betrayal. Healing, Elijah realized, wasn't a dramatic revelation. It was this, conversation without bitterness. A few weeks later, Mount Gregor held its annual charity gala. The hospital board wanted Elijah to speak, but he almost refused until Dr. Patel convinced him. People need to hear you, she said. That night, he stood beneath soft lights, facing an audience that had once turned away. 4 years ago, he began, I was invisible. People saw my uniform and decided what I was worth. Tonight, I stand here not because justice was given to me, but because I chose not to let injustice define me. The room was silent. Every word hung heavy honest. They took my job, my reputation, my name. But they couldn't take my knowledge, my compassion, or my integrity. Those don't belong to them. They belong to me. And to every person who's ever been underestimated. Applause began, soft at first, then thunderous. Cameras flashed, but Elijah wasn't performing. He was releasing something. Afterward, he slipped out to the terrace, looking over the glittering skyline. In the reflection of the glass doors, Genevieve appeared beside him, wearing no jewelry, just a quiet expression. You were right, she said. Justice isn't punishment, it's truth being seen. He nodded. Truth always wins. It just takes the long route. They stood together in silence, 2 people rebuilt from ruin. In the distance, the city pulsed, alive, indifferent, miraculous. Elijah thought of every unseen worker, every janitor, every nurse, every soul carrying unseen brilliance. The ones the world overlooks until the world needs saving. He smiled faintly. Respect everyone, he whispered, almost to himself. Because you never know who's holding the knowledge that could save your life. And with that, he turned back toward the hospital doors, back to the work, the light, the living.